Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Lisa, and if we haven't already met, it's nice to meet you. This is a channel dedicated to exploring all sorts of sociological and anthropological dynamics, and in this series specifically, we are breaking down the 4 pillars of the patriarchy. And in this video, we are covering the last and 4th pillar of the patriarchy. So if you haven't seen the previous 3 videos, please be sure to go and check them out. And today we're going to cover the 4th pillar that helps to uphold the patriarchy. And that pillar is women's compliance. Now, of course, most of this compliance is involuntary and unwilling, and we don't really have a choice in it. But in some ways, women are helping the patriarchy exist. And by deconstructing these things that we do as women to help the patriarchy thrive and continue to exist, then we can start to deconstruct the pillars that hold it up. And that is basically the goal of feminism, right? It's to deconstruct the patriarchy meaningfully, not just to make it a better place for some people and not others. And I think that true feminism doesn't really center around the same values that the patriarchy is centered around, like a hierarchy or like a lack mindset. And in order to really embrace this kind of radical deconstruction, we are also going to have to accept some radical ideas. Now, they're not going to be radical probably in the way that you think, but try to stick with me. So today I just want to talk about 2 things. And to all my fellow white women, this first part is going to apply to you. And you're going to want to get nice and comfortable, but it's things that we need to be aware of. And it's things that if they are not deconstructed, then we are never getting out of the patriarchy alive. But there may be times during this conversation that you start to feel defensive or called out. I've been there. It's not fun. But if you are feeling that way, if you are feeling attacked or you're feeling like defensive, just try to listen. That's just your conscious talking. It's not me attacking you, I promise. So let's talk about intersectionality and what real intersectional feminism could possibly look like if we really were to put our minds to it. So the first big idea that I really want white women to internalize and to think about is this idea of when do we celebrate the winning of rights? In my opinion, the most shameful moment in all of American history is white feminists celebrating winning their rights and leaving the Black women that organized, that protested, that marched with them, that did everything to support the movement in the dust. I think that is embarrassing and that is shameful, because this really gave way to what we are seeing now. And this really gave way to a lot of abuse and a lot more violence towards Black women. Because essentially what a lot of white women want, whether they're aware of it or not, is not freedom and equality for all women. What a lot of white women want is diet patriarchy, patriarchy light. Patriarchy with the men removed so that we can still keep the structure and we can still reap the rewards, the perceived rewards of the system, but this time with the white women on top. And this is frankly what a lot of white women want. If you were to look deep down within yourself and ask yourself, what do you want? Do you really want freedom and equality for all women? Or do you really just want to be able to compete in the patriarchy without the men, or just be accepted as one of the men so that you can get to the top of the structure? And if that's what you really want in your heart of hearts, then you have failed as a feminist. That is a big feminist fail. Because you're not changing the fundamental structure of the patriarchy. You perceive there to be rewards in that system that you can reap as a woman. I'm going to tell you the secret right now. There are no rewards for you as a woman in the patriarchy. There are no long-term meaningful rewards, no matter how well you perform it, no matter how well you fit into the structure, no matter how hard you work to support the structure. and keep it intact, you will never win the patriarchy game, because the patriarchy was made to benefit men and not women. There's no point in scrambling to try and play king of the hill with the men. It's king of the hill, not queen of the hill. It's the patriarchy, not the matriarchy. And the matriarchy wouldn't be a hierarchical structure anyway. The matriarchy is a flat circle with rings of support that go outward. I'll put graphics here to help. So as a white woman, what you have to understand is that the reason the patriarchy works so well is because it works by unfairly extracting value from other people. It's a hierarchical system in which you have to step on top of other people to get to the top. And once you get to the top, there's a perpetual king of the hill game. What I want you to understand as a woman, any kind of woman, is that the final boss of the patriarchy is being a man. The final boss is misogyny. And that's the part of the patriarchy that you're never going to overcome as a woman. We're going to talk about Taylor Swift a little bit, and we're going to talk about how she has unfortunately been a really great example of white feminism throughout her tenure as a pop star and as an influential figure in our society. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like that, but it's a good example. It's one of the best examples I can give you, because in her song, The Man, the way that she talks about wanting to be recognized for her efforts is very much in a patriarchy-centered way. She sees a structure and she sees her way to the top of it. And the problem with a lot of the idea of feminism that white women have is they can look up at the structure and they can see everything that's wrong with the structure above them, right? So when Taylor is addressing and calling out powerful men who have bullied her, who have prevented her from success, who have created this glass ceiling that she can't, seem to break through, she's right. All of those problems are there and they do exist. The way that she goes about trying to address the system is not in a way that would solve any inequalities meaningfully for anybody else other than rich and famous people. So the way that she is choosing to address the issue of the patriarchy is by trying to climb up to the very tippy top of it, not realizing that there's no room for her there ever. The final boss of the patriarchy is misogyny. You will never be the king of the hill if you're a woman. King implies man. King implies the patriarchy. And because Taylor is so focused on reaching the top of a hierarchical pyramid, she misses a lot of opportunities to not just call herself a feminist, but to actually be one meaningfully in a way that would change things for other women. Now, this is not to discount the representation that she's provided for girls. This is not to discount the influence that she's had. This is not to discount any of her talents. This is just to show you that even well-meaning people who seem to be successful and by all means thriving and seem to be sort of addressing these outdated patriarchal concepts, I really just want to look at how even when someone is being well-intentioned, they can still sort of miss the forest for the trees. And I want to talk about the time that Nicki Minaj called out the VMAs. So in her initial tweet on July 21st, 2015, Nicki Minaj said, "If your video celebrates women with very slim bodies, you will be nominated for Video of the Year." In response to that tweet that did not mention her, Taylor Swift responded, "At Nicki, I've done nothing but love and support you. It's unlike you to pit women against each other. Maybe one of the men took your slot." In response to that, Nikki said, you must not be reading my tweets. I didn't say a word about you. I love you just as much, but you should speak on this. And what I want you to notice about that conversation is this phenomenon that I just talked about. When Taylor Swift looks up, she can see what's wrong with the music industry and the VMAs and everything, right? She said, maybe one of the men took your spot. There's this common misconception when racism or body shaming gets called out. Not only does it get misinterpreted as women pitting other women against each other or as some sort of a call out to somebody that wasn't even mentioned, it implies a hierarchy, right? It implies somebody trying to take somebody else's spot. And when Nikki says, you should speak on this, what she's really saying is, hey, Taylor, I've called out a very obvious injustice here. And instead of uniting with me and saying, yeah, that is super weird, and using your voice to maybe call out the VMAs or tag the VMAs or anything like that, what you took it as is me trying to take your spot. Like there are spots that we can take from one another as women. Because at the end of the day, if you are worried about somebody taking your spot and you are getting competitive and misinterpreting things as a personal attack instead of a cry out for help, and instead of an opportunity to unite, rather than perceive things as an attack, you're the one pitting women against each other. And you're the one that is making sure that the patriarchy will exist tomorrow when we all wake up. What I'm saying is if you can see a problem with men taking women's spots and men throwing women under the bus, then you should be able to see where you are doing that as well. Because what you criticize in men should not be the same thing that you turn around and do to a woman who has less power than you in this structure, because you are perceiving her as coming for your spot. We are trying to get to a place where there are no spots, where there is no lack mindset, because that's the only way to move forward without people getting squashed by a structure that extracts value and brings all of it to the very tippy top. That's not the kind of structure that we want to live in. So if you can see the problem with men saying stuff like, oh, I'm a feminist until it's inconvenient. I'm a feminist until it's time to give up my voice and let somebody else speak. I'm a feminist until it's time to actually support, protect, or stand up for a woman. A lot of men say these things, and then, even worse, they use the cover of feminism to avoid any accountability, right? They say, well, I couldn't have possibly done what you're accusing me of doing because I'm a feminist. And then you basically have no recourse. So if you don't like it when men do that as a woman, then please do not turn around and do it to women of color. Please don't turn around and do it to disabled women. Don't turn around and do it to poor women, because those are all intersections that actually make these women see the world more clearly. They're pointing out something that you don't see. They're not trying to fault or blame you or take you down or say that you yourself are responsible for this. A lot of times we as white women feel really comfortable saying, oh, men this, men that, all men. And we make fun of men who say not all men because we're like, no, it is all men. It's too many men. How dare you say not all men? But then when we as white women get called out by Black women or women of color who say, you failed to see a place where you could have supported me. You didn't believe me here. You were focused on how this makes you look as a feminist rather than whom it actually helps. And then white women come out and say, well, I don't like being painted with a broad stroke brush as a white woman, which is the exact same thing you have to realize as a man saying it's not all men. Okay? Because the oppression goes deep. This is why we talk about intersectionality. Because as a white woman, there's a lot you don't see. And the only way that you're going to see it is by actually listening. The way that you want men to listen to you, you have to listen to women that hit more points of intersectionality than you, because they see the world more clearly in those ways. And you don't see it because you don't experience these ways of oppression, right? This is why we have to explain things to men that they don't experience and that they don't go through. And this is why they have trouble understanding it, because they take their lack of personal experience with these things as proof that they don't happen. And as white women, it's very easy for us to do the same thing. And I'm not excluding myself out of that. I'm not trying to talk down to anyone. This is just something we have to really deeply understand. When you are looking up and you're seeing all the problems with the patriarchy, but your solution is to climb to the top to show other women that it can be done, you're not meaningfully solving anything. You are just ensuring that the patriarchy continues to exist. And this is what happened when white feminists walked away and left Black feminists, Black women in the dust once they got what they wanted, because they could just smell the power. They could almost feel it. You know, they got what they wanted and they turned around and walked away. And I personally, for one, will be damned if I make the kind of content that encourages that kind of thing to ever happen again. So we are going to talk about this before we move forward with any sort of, discussion of feminism or patriarchy on this channel. You have to understand that as a white woman, your compliance in this system is one of the biggest roadblocks to equality and freedom for all. You have to understand that, the reason that white woman tears is such a common turn of phrase is because it's the way that white women navigate the patriarchy. When you cry about being called out, when you say, well, it's not, not all white women are like this, and it wasn't me, and I didn't mean to, and I was just trying to help, instead of listening, instead of changing, instead of apologizing, instead of doing better next time, when you just want to cry and blame women for pitting women against each other, when clearly they were coming to you with a call for help, a call for understanding, a call for change, a call for a better future. And if you use your tears, or you use the fact that you're a woman too, in order to shirk this responsibility and in order to avoid accountability, then you are no better than the men who participate in the patriarchy and then throw you under the bus. It is impossible for diet patriarchy to exist. As long as there is a hierarchical structure, men will control it. And as long as women continue to try and fight for a place in that hierarchy, women will continue to lose and the patriarchy will continue to win. It's literally that simple. So as a white woman, you have to deconstruct what you really view as feminism. You have to deconstruct this idea that everything above me is wrong, but everything below me is right, okay? It's not right. And basically, your unawareness of this only leads to the perpetuation further and further of the patriarchy. When Taylor Swift uses the charts to give herself power and to keep her songs trending in the charts, she does so at the expense of young female artists. She does so at the expense of up-and-coming female artists, and she doesn't care because her goal is to win the patriarchy. She wants to be the man, as she says in her song. So she doesn't actually want equality for all women, but she calls herself a feminist, but she wants to be the man. She's not deconstructing the patriarchy, she's perpetuating it further. And she's creating a world in which we still measure ourselves by success, beauty, accolades, awards, and we don't take intersectionality into account at all. And this is what white women are the most guilty of, because they are the closest out of all the women. They are the closest to the top of that hierarchy. So it's very tempting to want to just grasp it, to want to get up there and play king of the hill with the men. But I promise you, there's no reward for you in this at the end of the day. There's no reward. There's only betrayal of other women and the perpetuation of patriarchy. Obviously, this can be applied all down the line. There are so many points of intersectionality to consider and to deconstruct within ourselves as women, and we'll definitely be talking about all of that more. But for the sake of time and brevity, we're just going to stop there, and I'm just going to say that if you need to defer to anybody on what true feminism and what true freedom and the end of oppression would look like for women, you need to defer to somebody with a lot of points of intersectionality. because not only will they be able to understand your struggles, but they will also be able to cover all the bases, so to speak, of how these hierarchical systems oppress us and control us. And from there, we can deconstruct and meaningfully start to take the structure down and rebuild it into something that can serve everybody. But please don't for 1 second think that there's room for you to compete with the men. There isn't. It's not serious competition. And there's no reward for you at the end of this. There really isn't. A lot of women will find this. And I have videos on my TikTok that I'll upload to here as well, where I talk about trad women and trad wives and how eventually they will always realize they were wrong to support the system. But by the time they do, it will be too late. Supporting the system, supporting the patriarchy, no matter how well you do it, is a lazy, self-serving way to live, because you think it's going to get you out of fighting for people's rights. You think it's going to get you out of working hard. You think it's going to, be some sort of a shortcut to the top. But I repeat, there is no room for you at the top. There's only room for the men. So don't become disillusioned by this idea that you can win the game of patriarchy. The second part of this, of course, is to decenter men from your life as a woman. So we are now to the second part of the discussion. And this one is going to be pretty brief because it's something that we have talked a lot about in feminist spaces before. And I feel like at this point, a lot of people understand this idea. But basically, when it comes to men, if you ever want to see a world that is truly equal, you have to learn to take what's yours. When it comes to your romantic relationships with men, even friendships with men, you have to understand that their brain is wired and works a little bit differently than yours. Not because they're born that way, but because of what society rewards in men and in women. The reward center of men's brains lights up when they act selfishly. And that same reward center lights up in women's brains when they act selflessly or communally. So you have to understand your reward system is like intrinsically different than that of a man's. And you just have to move forward with that in mind. And a lot of ways that women get tricked into centering men and therefore supporting the patriarchy by putting an outsized amount of work into their relationship with a man at their own expense is by falling for potential and falling for, all this future faking that a lot of men do. And they don't look out for themselves enough to ask themselves whether they are getting just words and affirmations from this man or whether they are seeing any actionable items that have been acted upon. Like a lot of men talk about their ability to provide, to be there for someone, to be faithful and all this stuff. Even when they fail to tangibly provide any proof of that, or when they actively go against these values and these morals that they claim to have, women often still focus on the words and not the actions of these men. And they take them back and they put up with way too much because what they are centering is having a man and not their own well-being. Now, I'm not saying things can't get, into a gray area when you have children together. I'm not saying that nothing is ever worth working out or, in some cases getting past. But if you are doing that, please make sure that what is centered in that situation is not your relationship with a man, but that it is your own well-being or your children's well-being, or if you are somehow having to center your financial safety in that case, that is totally understandable. But always look out for yourself, because the biggest danger that you really run into is not even realizing how much time and blood and sweat and tears you have put into a relationship where none of the same was done for you. And in that way, you have put yourself at risk because you have taken hours out of your life that you could have focused on bettering yourself, on getting an education, on focusing on like earning more money at work, on basically doing all these things that you have to do to survive. And you end up inadvertently trapping yourself in a situation where you have to work things out with a cheating or unfaithful man, where now you have no choice but to stay together, where now you can't afford to get a divorce. And I really want a lot of women to be able to avoid that, because when you get stuck in these situations, it helps to support and perpetuate the patriarchy, because you are giving of yourself so that a man can succeed, so that a man doesn't have to take responsibility for his actions, so that a man isn't punished by the consequences of his own actions. If you are going to have children, please make sure that you protect yourself somehow. There's so much that comes with having a child, so much that women don't expect, so much that nobody can really predict. The ways that your body changes, the special needs that your child may have. It's very important to think about all of these things. And as a woman, to know that as things stand right now, the burden lies with you. A man can walk out of your life basically at any point and refuse to take care of the children that he made with you. A man can become out of nowhere, like financially controlling, abusive, and just not a safe person to be around. And a lot of this happens. The number one risk of death to pregnant women is homicide by a partner. So I'm not just like making this stuff up. I'm literally telling you to keep yourself safe, because a lot of the times when you become vulnerable, that's when abuse starts. So you have to make sure that you become untrappable. You have to make sure that you don't ever become so vulnerable that you can be abused. So whether that looks like, getting a prenup, whether that looks like getting a child care agreement, whether that looks like protecting yourself legally in any way, shape, or form, or even just demanding marriage before you have kids, or a savings account, or anything like that, where there's at least a little bit of responsibility that the man will be forced to deal with. Otherwise, you're just not securing yourself very well, and you're opening yourself up to abuse and to just possibly really bad consequences for both you and your child. And honestly, at the end of the day, like, yes, I know me saying this stuff is like, sounds ridiculous. And you're probably like, well, any man is going to laugh me out of the room for wanting a child care agreement or a prenup or whatever. Good. That's not the kind of man you want to be with. Men get away with these things, and that's why they keep doing them. So, yes, I know what I'm saying. And I know the kind of outcomes that it's going to have. And you should be okay with that. That's actually a good outcome. You're dodging a bullet. If a man is not willing to protect you legally, especially knowing all of these statistics and knowing that women really give of themselves for the benefit of men a lot of times, then that's probably not a person that wants the best for you. And honestly, at the end of the day, never have children unless you are prepared to do it alone someday. If you're married, you can still decenter men. It's actually very easy. Just don't do anything for your husband that he wouldn't do for you. Just look at it like that. And for a lot of women, if you are several years into a marriage and you're starting to see like cracks in the foundation, this is probably where those cracks are. This is probably where you are feeling like your relationship is not quite working. You have probably realized over a cumulative period of time that you do much more for your husband than he would ever be willing to do for you. And at this point, it may be time to pull back and perform a little experiment and see how much effort is being put into your relationship on both sides, and where you as the woman are closing that gap. So if you're married, don't center your husband's career, don't center his needs, his wants, etc., more than he's willing to center yours. Do not perform labor for him that he's not willing to perform for you. Unless you guys have very clear and specific agreements on these things, I understand situations in which you may need to center one person's career more than another, in which supporting somebody else's career may be of benefit to you, but really stop and think, like, is it a long-term benefit? What are the things that can happen? Decentering men means stop being so selfless when it comes to your relationships with men. When it comes to your relationships with male friends, like stop making excuses for them. If they're not a good friend, don't be friends with them. If they're not willing to help you out as much as you have helped them out, then don't be that's not a person that is benefiting you. And I promise you, they wouldn't be friends with you if your friendship didn't benefit them in one way or another. And again, yes, this process can be uncomfortable. This process might be very uncomfortable for you and your husband or boyfriend or fiance or whatever. Because at the end of the day, this is unfamiliar territory for everybody. Women have not been able to meaningfully decenter men for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when we talk about real meaningful change, it is going to be uncomfortable, and your partner may not like it. Your partner may feel very, in fact, neglected because they have been so used to an outsized amount of attention and labor from you than they have been willing to provide in return. So you need to think about all of these things as a woman and know that there might be some resistance. This might result in a fracture of the relationship. But again, this is a bullet that you will have dodged. I promise you. This is not something you want to keep going long term at your expense, because somebody who is used to things happening at your expense will get used to that. Like they're going to continue having that expectation. And so when you get sick, when there's something that you're going to need help with, it's going to feel very unfamiliar to them and they're not going to like it. They're going to get uncomfortable. This is why we had that stat in the first video where men are 7 times more likely to leave women with a terminal disease, to the point where women get prepped for that in oncologist's office when they have cancer. They are told, hey, your husband literally might leave you. Just, you might want to know that. You might want to start preparing yourself for that. There's literally pamphlets about this that women get handed. So just know that there's no reward for you. Again, there's no reward for you in centering a man and centering the patriarchy and making your life all about a man, because chances are if you do that, he's going to want to keep that dynamic until the very, very end. And the end of your relationship will come as long as that dynamic is no longer being kept, as long as he is no longer centered. And we'll talk about this more, but this part is going to be uncomfortable for men, because the more that women find themselves in this system, the more that the patriarchy literally gets deconstructed, because it's no longer has the blood, sweat, and tears of women to keep it going. Women have taken out the part that's happening at their expense. And this will be uncomfortable and very weird for a lot of men, because they will feel like, what is my place in this? And that's for them to answer, right? Women have never been able to define the terms on which their oppression happens. They've never been able to define the terms of their own existence. And that's what we need to start really deciding and defining right now. And men will need to do the same, because with a lot of women's labor and attention removed, they're going to need to find ways to feel valuable and to make a way for themselves without oppressing anybody. And that part might be uncomfortable. And so you have to remember that because of that, there's value for men in keeping women down. This is why they're walking back a lot of our rights. This is why we're going back, to the Stone Age, because this is hard and uncomfortable for men. But this is what it takes to start that deconstruction process. And so we have to know what it entails. And like I said, some of us are going to be uncomfortable. This isn't pretty for everybody to hear, but this is what it's going to take to achieve freedom and equality and the end of oppression for all of us. All right, we'll be back with more content next week. That's all I got for you today. Hope you have an awesome rest of your day. And I will see you next time. We may start a new series, or I might just do a couple standalone videos. If there's any topics that you want me to cover in depth, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I would love to know what's on everybody's mind lately. All right, love you so much. Bye.